Elvis Presley didn't just serve in the Army from 1958 to 1960. He met a 14-year-old girl in Germany, started using amphetamines to stay awake during duty, and returned to America fundamentally changed in ways his handlers worked hard to conceal. In March 1958, Elvis was drafted at the peak of his career and sent to West Germany, where he met Priscilla Beaulieu at a party in September 1959. She was 14 years old, he was 24, and military officials who knew about the relationship chose to look the other way because Elvis was too valuable for morale. During those 2 years in Germany, Elvis also began using prescription amphetamines distributed openly among soldiers to maintain alertness during long shifts, establishing patterns of drug dependency that would eventually kill him, while Colonel Parker controlled every aspect of his public image from America, ensuring no scandal emerged that might damage the product he'd built. This video reveals what Army records say about Elvis's service versus what soldiers who served with him later disclosed, how a relationship with a minor was permitted to continue on a U.S. military base without intervention, why amphetamine use was considered normal among Cold War soldiers, and how it led to Elvis's lifelong prescription drug addiction, what happened when Elvis's mother Gladys died while he was in basic training, and how that trauma shaped his relationship with Priscilla, and why military documentation carefully omits details about Elvis's personal life that would have created scandals the Army couldn't afford during the height of American cultural influence in post-war Germany. The Base Commander's Office, Bad Nauheim, West Germany, September 19. Captain Joseph Beaulieu sat across from Colonel Mitchell. Between them, a report. 3 pages, single-spaced, marked confidential personnel matter. The report detailed a complaint. An anonymous source, likely another soldier's wife, had observed Private Elvis Presley, age 24, spending considerable time with Priscilla Beaulieu, age 14, daughter of Air Force Captain Joseph Beaulieu. The relationship appears social in nature, the report stated. Subject Priscilla has been observed visiting the Beaulieu residence multiple times per week. Subject Priscilla has been seen in Presley's company at base events and off-base locations. Age disparity raises concerns regarding appropriateness and potential violation of base conduct standards. Colonel Mitchell read the report slowly, set it down, looked at Captain Beaulieu. Your daughter, 14 years old, spending time with a 24-year-old private. That's what this says. Beaulieu shifted in his seat. Sir, I'm aware of the friendship. Elvis has been respectful. He comes to our home. My wife and I are present. Nothing inappropriate has occurred. Friendship. Mitchell let the word hang in the air. A grown man and a teenage girl. That's the friendship you're describing. Elvis has been a perfect gentleman, sir. Priscilla is mature for her age. She understands. I don't care how mature she is, Captain. She's 14. This is a United States Army base. We have regulations, standards. The press would have a field day if this became public. Beaulieu nodded, waited. Mitchell picked up the report again, flipped to the final page. The recommendation section. Immediate termination of contact between subjects. Formal counseling for Private Presley. Potential transfer to different posting if contact continues. He set the report down, looked at Beaulieu. Here's the problem, Captain. Elvis Presley isn't just any private. He's the most famous person in this man's army. His presence here is worth more to morale than a dozen USO shows. Soldiers want to see him. The press covers every move he makes. He's good for American image in Germany. Yes, sir. So we have a choice. We follow regulations, separate them, risk Elvis making a scene or the press finding out why we intervened, creating exactly the scandal we're trying to avoid. Or, Mitchell opened his desk drawer, pulled out a lighter, held the report over his desk ashtray. Or we decide this complaint lacks sufficient evidence to warrant action. Anonymous sources aren't reliable. Without direct observation of misconduct, we have no basis for intervention. The relationship, as you've described it, is supervised and appropriate. Case closed. He lit the corner of the report, watched it burn. The pages curled, turned black, became ash. There's no record of this conversation, Captain. No documentation of any complaint. Your daughter's friendship with Private Presley is a private family matter, not a military concern. As long as it stays private. Understood? Understood, sir. Beaulieu left the office. The report was gone. Officially, it had never existed. And Elvis continued visiting the Beaulieu house 3-4 times a week, taking Priscilla to movies, to restaurants, to his rented home off base where they'd sit and talk for hours while his army buddies played cards in the next room. The relationship everyone saw but no one documented. The girl too young but too connected to a man too famous to discipline. The army looked the other way. and the pattern that would define the rest of Elvis's life. Rules bent, standards ignored, problems buried because he was too valuable to lose, became established practice. The report was ash, but the relationship continued for years, long after Elvis returned to America, until Priscilla moved to Graceland at age 17 and married Elvis when she turned 21. And the Army's official records, they show Private Presley as an exemplary soldier. No disciplinary issues, no complaints, no controversies, just a clean service record and a relationship that was never supposed to exist. December 20, 1957. Memphis, Tennessee. Elvis Aaron Presley received his draft notice. Report for induction into the United States Army. March 24, he was 22 years old. The biggest star in American music. 4 #1 hits in 1956 alone. Movies, sold-out concerts, girls screaming his name everywhere he went. And now, the Army wanted him. Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis's manager, saw opportunity. This is good for image. Shows you're patriotic, all-American boy serving his country. The fans will love it even more when you come back. Elvis didn't want to go. He'd just bought Graceland. His career was exploding. 2 years away would kill momentum. But refusing wasn't an option. Draft dodging would destroy him. So Elvis reported to Fort Chaffee, Arkansas, on March 24, 1958. Photographers everywhere. Newsreel cameras rolling. The Army cutting Elvis Presley's famous hair became national news. How do you feel about losing your hair, Elvis? It's just hair. It'll grow back. But everything else that would be lost wouldn't grow back so easily. Basic training at Fort Hood, Texas. Brutal. Designed to break down civilians and rebuild them as soldiers. Elvis got no special treatment. Drill sergeants pushed him as hard as anyone. Maybe harder, they wanted to prove he wasn't getting favors because he was famous. He woke at 5 a.m., ran miles in Texas heat, did push-ups until his arms shook, learned to disassemble and reassemble rifles, marched, saluted, followed orders without question. The other soldiers watched him carefully at first, waiting to see if he'd complain, if he'd act like a star. He didn't. Elvis ate the same food, slept in the same barracks, cleaned latrines when assigned, never asked for exceptions. The resentment faded. He became one of them, just another private trying to survive basic training. But then in August 1958, 4 months into his service, Elvis received a call. His mother Gladys was sick, heart problems. She'd been admitted to Methodist Hospital in Memphis. Elvis requested emergency leave. The Army granted it. He flew to Memphis immediately. Gladys Presley died on August 14th, heart failure. Elvis was devastated. His mother had been the center of his world. She'd supported him when he was poor, celebrated every success, worried about fame changing him. Now she was gone, and Elvis was alone in ways he'd never been before. He returned to Fort Hood for the rest of basic training. Quieter now, the other soldiers noticed. He smiled less, kept to himself more. In September 1958, Elvis received his permanent assignment, Germany. He'd be stationed with the 3rd Armored Division in Friedberg, assigned to Bad Nauheim for off-base housing. The Army was sending him overseas, away from everything familiar, away from Graceland and Memphis and the life he'd known. Colonel Parker stayed behind. Couldn't leave America, reasons he never fully explained. So he controlled Elvis's career from a distance, issuing statements, managing press, making sure the public didn't forget about their boy serving overseas. But Parker couldn't control what happened to Elvis in Germany. Couldn't monitor his daily life. Couldn't see the changes happening beneath the surface. And by the time Elvis returned to America in March 1960, he'd become someone different. Someone his mother wouldn't have recognized. Someone carrying dependencies and relationships that would shape the rest of his tragically short life. The Army years weren't a pause in Elvis's story. They were where everything started to go wrong. Germany, 1958, Cold War at its height. American soldiers stationed along the Iron Curtain faced long shifts, guard duty, patrols, constant readiness in case Soviet forces crossed the border. Staying awake was critical. Falling asleep on duty could mean court-martial, could mean missing an attack, could cost lives. So the Army had a solution: amphetamines. Not illegal, not hidden, distributed openly by medical personnel to soldiers who needed help staying alert during extended duty periods. PEP pills, they called them. Go pills. Small white tablets that made sleep unnecessary, made exhaustion disappear, made soldiers sharp and focused for hours beyond normal human endurance. Elvis received his first dose during a 24-hour duty rotation. The medic handed him 2 pills, Take these, you'll be fine. Elvis swallowed them, felt the effect within an hour. Energy surging, alertness heightened, the fatigue that had been crushing him gone. He stayed awake for 26 hours, felt great the entire time. When the shift ended, he crashed hard, slept for 14 hours straight. But the next long shift, he took the pills again, and again, and again. This was the beginning. The moment Elvis learned that pills could change how he felt, could make discomfort disappear, could keep him functioning when his body said stop. The amphetamines were legal, doctor approved, part of standard military practice for maintaining readiness. But they had effects beyond alertness. Amphetamines suppress appetite. Elvis, who'd always struggled with weight, noticed he was eating less, losing pounds without trying. They create euphoria. Elvis felt better taking them, more confident, more energized. The grief over his mother's death became easier to manage when he was speeding. They're addictive. Not immediately, but over months of regular use, the body adapts, starts needing them. Without the pills, everything feels slower, heavier, wrong. Elvis didn't realize what was happening. He thought he was just taking medicine to do his job, following doctor's orders, being a good soldier, but patterns were forming, neural pathways being established, a relationship with pills that would define the rest of his life. By 1959, Elvis was taking amphetamines, not just for duty, but for daily function, to wake up, to get through boring tasks, to feel normal. Other soldiers did the same. It wasn't considered a problem, just standard practice for maintaining performance under difficult conditions. The Army medical records don't document this as addiction. They document it as appropriate use of prescribed medication for duty-related requirements. But Elvis's friends from that period later described someone who changed, someone who relied on pills, who couldn't sleep without taking something to counter the amphetamines, who was developing the early stages of the dependency that would eventually kill him. And when Elvis returned to America in 1960, the amphetamine use didn't stop. He'd learned that pills could fix problems, that doctors would prescribe them, that no one questioned it as long as you called it treatment. The Army had given Elvis more than military training. It had given him an introduction to prescription drug use that seemed medical, seemed necessary, seemed normal. And that introduction would become a 17-year addiction that ended with his death at age 4, September 13, 1959. Bad Nauheim, West Germany. Curry Grant, one of Elvis's Army buddies, was throwing a party at his place. "Come on, Elvis. You've been moping around for weeks. Get out, meet some people." Elvis didn't want to go. He preferred staying in his rented house, playing music, writing letters to friends back home. But Grant insisted. "There's this girl, Air Force captain's daughter. Priscilla, pretty, smart, you'll like her." Elvis went, walked into a room full of soldiers and their families, music playing, people dancing, and there she was. Priscilla Beaulieu, dark hair, bright eyes, beautiful in a way that made her seem older than she was. Grant introduced them. "Elvis, this is Priscilla. Priscilla, Elvis Presley." She smiled, nervous but composed. "I know who you are." They talked. Elvis asked about her family. Her father was Air Force, stationed at Wiesbaden. They'd been in Germany for 2 years. She attended an American school on base. "How old are you?" Elvis asked. 14. He was 24, 10 years older, a grown man. She was a child. But Elvis didn't walk away, didn't end the conversation, didn't recognize or care that the age gap was inappropriate. Instead, he asked if he could see her again. Priscilla's parents should have said no. Their daughter was 14. Elvis was 24. The power dynamic was impossible to ignore. He was famous, wealthy, charismatic. She was a teenager living on a military base, starstruck by the biggest name in music. But Captain and Mrs. Beaulieu said yes. Perhaps they were starstruck too. Perhaps they thought supervised visits were harmless. Perhaps they didn't want to be the parents who denied Elvis Presley access to their daughter. Whatever the reason, they allowed the relationship to continue. Elvis visited the Beaulieu home multiple times per week, always with her parents present initially. They'd sit in the living room, talk, listen to music. Elvis brought records, played guitar, made Priscilla laugh. Mrs. Beaulieu later said, "He was always respectful, never inappropriate. We trusted him." But trust doesn't change the fact that a 24-year-old man was pursuing a relationship with a 14-year-old girl, that he was spending hours alone with her as the supervision slowly relaxed, that he was shaping her understanding of relationships during critical formative years. Priscilla later wrote in her memoir that Elvis kissed her during one of those early visits. She was 14, he was 24. She described feeling special, chosen, important. She didn't describe it as inappropriate because from her teenage perspective it wasn't. She saw a famous man paying attention to her, caring about her, making her feel mature and valued. But from an adult perspective looking back, the dynamic was clear: grooming. An adult man cultivating a relationship with a minor, establishing control and dependency that would last years. The relationship wasn't secret. Soldiers saw Elvis with Priscilla. Officers knew. Wives gossiped. And at least one person filed a complaint. The report that ended up on Colonel Mitchell's desk. The report he burned rather than act on. Why? Because Elvis Presley was too valuable. His presence in Germany was worth more to the army than enforcing regulations about age-appropriate relationships. Elvis boosted morale. Soldiers wanted to serve on the same base as him. The press covered his army service positively, showing American boys doing their duty even at the peak of fame and success. Intervening would create problems. Elvis might react badly. The press might find out. Questions would be asked about why the army allowed a grown man to date a 14-year-old on a military base. Better to look the other way. Pretend it wasn't happening. Let Captain Beaulieu handle his own family matters. So the army did nothing. Officially, there was no relationship, no documentation, no complaints, no investigation. Priscilla continued attending base events with Elvis. They were photographed together, though those photos weren't released to American media. They went to movies, restaurants, parties. Everyone knew. No one intervened. When Elvis's discharge approached in March 1960, the question became, what happens to Priscilla? She was 15 now, still in high school, still living with her parents in Germany. Elvis didn't want to lose her. She'd become important to him, perhaps filling the void left by his mother's death, perhaps providing innocence and adoration that adult relationships didn't offer. He promised to stay in touch, to bring her to America when she was older, to wait for her. And he did. For 2 years, Elvis and Priscilla maintained the relationship through letters and occasional phone calls. He sent gifts, invited her family to visit Memphis during Christmas night. Then in 1963, when Priscilla was 17, Elvis convinced her parents to let her move to Graceland, ostensibly to finish high school in Memphis, actually to live with him. Captain and Mrs. Beaulieu agreed. Their teenage daughter moved into the home of a 28-year-old man, with their permission, with their blessing. Priscilla later said Elvis didn't pressure her into sex immediately, that he wanted to wait until marriage, that he valued her innocence, but he controlled every aspect of her life: what she wore, how she styled her hair, who she spent time with. He shaped her into his ideal woman, starting when she was 14 and continuing through her teenage years until she became the person he'd molded her to be. They married in 1967 when Priscilla was 21. Divorced in 19... Priscilla later described the marriage as suffocating, controlling, built on a foundation where she'd never had the chance to be her own person, because she'd been 14 when it started. And Elvis had been the adult with all the power, and no one, not her parents, not the army, not Elvis's handlers, had stopped it. March 5, 1960. Elvis Presley discharged from active duty. Press conference at Fort Dix, New Jersey. Photographers everywhere. Questions shouted from reporters eager for the first interview with Elvis since he'd left for Germany. How does it feel to be back, Elvis? Good. Real good. Ready to get back to work. What was Germany like? Beautiful country, good people. I learned a lot. Any romances we should know about? Elvis smiled. Charming. Practiced. Nothing serious. Just friends. The reporters laughed. Moved on to questions about his music career, his upcoming movie deals, what Colonel Parker had planned. No one asked about Priscilla. No one knew her name yet. The relationship had been successfully kept out of American media. Elvis returned to a hero's welcome. The military service had done exactly what Colonel Parker predicted, made him more beloved, more American, more acceptable to parents who'd worried about his hip-shaking corrupting their daughters. He'd served his country, done his duty, come back ready to entertain again. But Elvis, who returned, wasn't the same person who'd been drafted. His mother was gone. The grief hadn't healed, wouldn't heal. Gladys's death had created a void Elvis spent the rest of his life trying to fill. He'd started using amphetamines regularly. The pattern established in Germany continued in America. Doctors prescribed them, Elvis took them. No one called it addiction because it was medical treatment. He'd formed a relationship with a girl who was now 15, living in Germany, waiting for him to bring her to America. A relationship that would define his personal life for the next decade. And he'd learned something dangerous during those army years. Rules didn't really apply to him. Regulations could be bent. Problems could be buried. As long as he was valuable enough, important enough, famous enough, authorities would look the other way. The Army had covered up his relationship with a minor, had provided him with amphetamines without question, had documented him as an exemplary soldier despite behavior that would have gotten others court-martialed. Elvis learned he was untouchable. That fame created immunity. And that lesson would follow him for the next 17 years, enabling behaviors and dependencies that would eventually kill him. Elvis Presley's official Army service record describes an exemplary soldier. Private Presley performed all duties in a satisfactory manner, demonstrated initiative and cooperation, maintained good conduct throughout service period, recommended for honorable discharge. No disciplinary actions, no complaints, no issues. But soldiers who served with Elvis tell different stories. One described Elvis taking pep pills daily. Everyone did it. The medics handed them out like candy, but Elvis took more than most, said he needed them to function. Another recalled Elvis disappearing for days at a time. He'd go off base to his rental house. Sometimes we wouldn't see him for 48 hours. Officers didn't care as long as he showed up for official duties. A third remembered the Priscilla relationship clearly. We all knew about it, talked about how young she was, but nobody was going to report Elvis Presley. You wanted to be his friend, not the guy who got him in trouble. None of this appears in official records, because officially, it didn't happen. The Army's documentation of Elvis's service is curated, sanitized, carefully managed to present an image that served institutional interests, showing that even famous people served without special treatment. But the reality was different. Elvis received special treatment constantly, just not officially. Medical records are particularly notable for what they omit. Elvis received regular prescriptions for amphetamines during his service, standard practice for soldiers on extended duty. But the quantity, frequency, and continuation of prescriptions beyond duty requirements isn't documented. When Elvis returned to America and immediately began seeing civilian doctors for similar prescriptions, the pattern suggests dependency had already formed. But Army medical records show no concerns about overuse or addiction risk. Either the doctors didn't notice, unlikely given the quantities involved, or they noticed and didn't document it, because documenting it would create a problem the Army didn't want to address. Elvis Presley, the product, was more valuable than Elvis Presley, the person. Maintaining the image mattered more than addressing emerging addiction patterns. The Priscilla relationship is completely absent from official documentation. No mention of her name in any report. No record of Elvis's regular visits to the Beaulieu home. No documentation of the complaint that Colonel Mitchell burned. If you read only official Army records, you'd never know Elvis met Priscilla in Germany. Never know a relationship developed between a 24-year-old soldier and a 14-year-old girl on a U.S. military base. That omission was deliberate. The Army couldn't officially acknowledge something that would raise questions about why they allowed it to continue. So it was erased from the record, made invisible, reduced to rumor and later memoir revelations rather than documented fact. The relationship happened, everyone involved knew it happened, but officially it never did. And that erasure protected the Army from accountability for permitting an inappropriate relationship because the soldier involved was too famous to discipline. Priscilla Presley later said the relationship damaged her in ways she didn't understand until decades after it ended. I was 14. I didn't have a chance to develop my own identity. Elvis shaped everything, how I dressed, how I thought, what I believed about relationships. I became who he wanted me to be. She married him at 21, had his child, lived in Graceland under rules he set, left the marriage at 27, finally finding independence. I don't blame him entirely, but I wish someone had protected me. Told my parents no, said this isn't appropriate. I was a child, he was an adult. That should have mattered. The Army could have intervened, could have enforced regulations, could have separated them for Priscilla's protection. They chose not to, because Elvis was valuable, because scandal would damage image, because protecting a 14-year-old girl mattered less than protecting institutional interests. For Elvis, the cost was different but equally destructive. The amphetamine dependency that started in Germany never ended. The pills that helped him stay awake during Army duty became pills he needed to function daily. By the mid-1960s, Elvis was taking uppers to wake up, downers to sleep, painkillers for discomfort, all prescribed by doctors who never questioned whether they were enabling addiction. Dr. George Nikopoulos, who became Elvis's primary physician in 1967, later admitted prescribing over 10,000 pills and vials to Elvis in the final years of his life. He believed they were medicine. I believed I was treating medical conditions. Neither of us called it addiction. But it was addiction. Started in Germany when Elvis was 23 years old, enabled by army doctors who distributed amphetamines without tracking dependency risk, continued by civilian doctors who wrote prescriptions without question. Elvis died August 16, 1977. Cardiac arrest caused by polypharmacy, too many drugs interacting in his system. The autopsy found 14 different substances in his body. 10 were prescription medications. The pattern established in Germany, hidden in army records, had finally killed him. The army years weren't a break in Elvis's career. They were the beginning of the end. The place where addiction started, where an inappropriate relationship was allowed to develop, where Elvis learned that fame created immunity from consequences. And the records? They show an exemplary soldier who served with distinction. Everything else, the pills, the girl, the problems, was erased from official history. Graceland, Memphis, Elvis Presley's former home, now a museum. In a climate-controlled display case, Elvis's army uniform, perfectly preserved. The jacket he wore in Germany, the patches, the rank insignia. Tourists photograph it daily. Elvis served his country, the guide says. An example of patriotism and duty. What the display doesn't mention, the amphetamines he started taking while wearing that uniform. The 14-year-old girl he met while stationed overseas. The patterns that would kill him 17 years after discharge. March 24, 1958, Elvis drafted into the U.S. Army. 2 years later, discharged with an honorable record. But between those dates, everything changed. He met Priscilla when she was 14. He was 20. Military officials knew, filed a complaint, then burned it. Because Elvis was too valuable to lose, too famous to discipline. He started using amphetamines. Army doctors prescribed them freely. No one tracked dependency. No one called it addiction. The pattern was set. Pills to function. Pills to perform. Pills prescribed by doctors who never questioned why. Elvis returned to America in 19. The Army records show an exemplary soldier. They don't show the addiction that started there. They don't document the relationship with a minor that everyone saw but no one stopped. They don't mention that the 2 years in Germany were where Elvis Presley, the person, started disappearing. Replaced by Elvis Presley, the product controlled by pills, controlled by handlers, controlled by a system that valued image over truth. The uniform sits in Graceland, perfect, preserved, honored. But the man who wore it came home broken in ways the Army refused to document. The records say exemplary service. The truth says this is where it all went wrong. And nobody wanted that truth in the official history.